People do stupid things. That's what spreads HIV. This was a headline in a UK newspaper, The Guardian, not that long ago. I'm curious, show of hands, who agrees with it? One or two brave souls. This is actually a direct quote from an epidemiologist who's been in the field of HIV for 15 years, worked on 4 continents, and you're looking at her. And I am now going to argue that this is only half true. People do get HIV because they do stupid things, but most of them are doing stupid things for perfectly rational reasons. Now, rational is the dominant paradigm in public health, and if you put your public health nerd glasses on, you'll see that if we give people the information that they need about what's good for them, what's bad for them, if you give them the services that they can use to act on that information, a little bit of motivation, people will make rational decisions and live long and healthy lives. Wonderful. Slightly problematic for me because I work in HIV, and although I'm sure that you all know that HIV is about poverty and gender inequality, and if you were at TED 07 it's about coffee prices, actually HIV is about sex and drugs, and if there are two things that make human beings a little bit irrational, they are erections and addiction. Now, the first person to figure that out and do something about it on a national scale was that well-known bleeding heart liberal, Margaret Thatcher. And she put in the world's first national needle exchange program, and other countries followed suit, Australia, the Netherlands, and a few others. And in all of those countries, you can see not more than 4% ever became infected with HIV. Margaret Thatcher didn't do this because she has any great love for junkies. She did it because she ran a country that had a national health service. So if she didn't invest in effective prevention, she was going to have to pick up the costs of treatment later on, and obviously those are much higher. So she was making a politically rational decision. So what we've been doing in the United States is reviewing the data, endlessly reviewing the data. So these are reviews of hundreds of studies by all the big muckety-mucks of the scientific pantheon in the United States, and these are the studies that show that needle programs are effective, quite a lot of them. Now, the ones that show that needle programs aren't effective, you think that's one of these annoying dynamic slides and I'm going to press my dongle and the rest of it's going to come up, but no, that's the whole slide. There is nothing on the other side. So, completely irrational, you would think, except that, wait a minute, politicians are rational too. And they're responding to what they think the voters want. So what we see is that voters respond very well to things like this, and not quite so well to things like this. So it becomes quite rational to deny services to injectors. Now let's talk about sex. Are we any more rational about sex? Well, I'm not even going to address the, clearly irrational positions of people like the Catholic Church, who think somehow that if you give out condoms, you're just going to, everyone's going to run out and have sex. I don't know if Pope Benedict watches TED-Talks online, but if you do, I've got news for you, Benedict. I carry condoms all the time, and I never get laid. It's not that easy. Here, maybe you'll have better luck. Sexual transmission of HIV is essentially determined by how many partners you have in these very short spaces of time when you have peak viremia. Now, this makes people crazy because it means that you have to talk about some groups having more sexual partners in short spaces of time than other groups, and that's considered stigmatizing. I've always been a bit curious about that because I think stigma's a bad thing, whereas lots of sex is quite a good thing, but we'll leave that be. The truth is that 20 years of very good research have shown us that there are groups that are more likely to turn over large numbers of partners in a short space of time. And those groups are globally people who sell sex, and they're more regular partners. They are gay men on the party scene who have on average 3 times more partners than straight people on the party scene, and they are people heterosexuals who come from countries that have traditions of polygamy and relatively high levels of female autonomy. And almost all of those countries are in East or Southern Africa. And that is reflected in the epidemic that we have today. So you can see these horrifying figures from Africa. These are all countries in Southern Africa where between 1 in 7 and 1 in 3 of all adults are infected with HIV. Now, in the rest of the world, we've got basically nothing going on in the general population, very, very low levels. But we have extraordinarily high levels of HIV in these other populations who are at highest risk. So drug injectors, sex workers, and gay men. In most of the world, these few prevention failures notwithstanding, we are actually doing quite well these days in commercial sex. Condom use rates are between 80 and 100% in commercial sex in most countries. And again, it's because of an alignment of the incentives. What's rational for public health is also rational for individual sex workers, because it's really bad for business to have another STI. No one wants it. And actually, clients don't want to go home with a drip either. So essentially, you're able to achieve quite high rates of condom use in commercial sex. But in intimate relations, it's much more difficult, because with your wife or your boyfriend or someone that you hope might turn into one of those things, we have this illusion of romance and trust and intimacy, and nothing is quite so unromantic as the "my condom or yours, darling" question. That people are simply not as scared of HIV as they were of AIDS, and rightly so. AIDS was a disfiguring disease that killed you, and HIV is an invisible virus that makes you take a pill every day. And that's boring, but is it as boring as having to use a condom every time you have sex, no matter how drunk you are, no matter how many poppers you've taken, whatever? And that's a very worrisome thing. What does it mean? It means that we need to be doing more prevention the more treatment we have. Is that what's happening? No, and I call it the compassion conundrum. We've talked a lot about compassion in the last couple of days, and what's happening really is that people are unable quite to bring themselves to put in good sexual and reproductive health services for sex workers, unable quite to be giving out needles to junkies. But once they've gone from being transgressive people whose behaviors we don't want to condone to being AIDS victims, we come overall compassionate and buy them incredibly expensive drugs for the rest of their lives. It doesn't make any sense from a public health point of view. I want to give what's very nearly the last word to Ines. Ines is a transgender hooker on the streets of Jakarta. She's a chick with a dick. Why does she do that job? Well, of course, because she's forced into it, because she doesn't have any options, etc., etc. And if we could just teach her to sew and get her a nice job in a factory, all would be well. And this is what factory workers earn in an hour in Indonesia, on average 20 cents. It varies a bit from province to province. I do speak to sex workers, 15,000 of them for this particular slide. And this is what sex workers say they earn in an hour. So it's not a great job, but for a lot of people it really is quite a rational choice. Okay, Ines.
Kita alatnya ada, pengetahuannya ada, duitnya ada, kemauannya dari kita ada. Tetapi
kenapa prevalensinya?
Ya, nah pertanyaan saya itu.
Saya baru nggak tahu nih. Politik lah itu kan, makanya udah bicara politik udah pusing.
When you get to politics, nothing makes sense. So from the point of view of a sex worker, politicians are making no sense. From the point of view of a public health nerd, junkies are doing dumb things. I mean, the truth is that everyone has a different rationale. There are as many different ways of being rational as there are human beings on the planet, and that's one of the glories of human existence. But those ways of being rational are not independent of one another. So it's rational for a drug injector to share needles because of a stupid decision that's made by a politician. And it's rational for a politician to make that stupid decision because they're responding to what they think the voters want. But here's the thing, we are the voters. We're not all of them, of course, but TED is a community of opinion leaders, and everyone who's in this room and everyone who's watching this out there on the web, I think, has a duty to demand of their politicians that we make policy based on scientific evidence and on common sense. It's going to be really hard for us to individually affect what's rational for every Frankie and every Innes out there. But you can at least use your vote to stop politicians doing stupid things that spread HIV. Thank you.